Hey folks, welcome to the first of two lectures on the fourth gospel, on the Gospel of John. We're going to start by doing kind of an intuitive read into the gospel by looking at John's prologue. Now, if you've read John before, now there's no reason why you should have, but if you've read it before, you will have noticed that it begins very theologically. So I'm going to go ahead and turn to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about what's going on with this gospel. First off, if you want to open up to the Gospel of John, the first chapter, and read through the first 18 verses. And if you have a pen or whatever that you can write into your Bible with, a pencil or something, outline the passage thematically. So look for common words and words that might be on opposite ends of the pole. So light and darkness, for example, might be two words that are sort of opposites. And what words then align with those? What are their dual terms and their opposites? Take a moment or two to pause the video now, and if you'd like, and read through the gospel, these first 18 verses, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what's going on. Okay, now that you're back, the thing that I wanted to do with you is go through and talk about these different aspects of the fourth gospel, these different pieces of the fourth gospel, the dualities. Let's begin just by reading it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Now, what do these words remind you of in the beginning here? What do those remind you of? Well, of course, it reminds you of the beginning of the Old Testament, doesn't it? The beginning of Genesis, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? And then you have some of these terms like the Word, right? And the Word was God. And the Word was with God, right? The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through Him, and without Him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in Him was life, and the life was the light of all the people. And here I've got light up here. So if you look at all of this and how it all connects, all of these things would be on the side of light. All of these terms would be on the side of light. So what we can do is we can begin to add some of these terms. So the Word, right? God, right? Being, all things came into being through Him. Not one thing came into being without Him. So darkness, non-being. What has come into being in Him was life. The life was the light of all the people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. So you see that the light and darkness are contrasted too, right? And the darkness cannot overcome the light. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. Does that mean the world is the light? Actually, for John's sort of duality and dualism, the world is not the light. The light is coming into the world, and in fact, he was in the world, as you see He was in the world. He was in the world, but the world came into being through him. But here is the key term. The world did not know him. Right? He came to what was his own. Right? So the world is on this side, on the darkness side. And in fact, you could talk about the world being not only not being, but not knowing, right? Because the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. So that rejection of him, his own people. And by that, John means the people of Israel. You have a real dualism between those who received him and those who did not. They did not accept him. So not acceptance is on that side of darkness. But all who received him, who believed in his name, see, I can't even type, believed in his name, he gave the power to become the children of God. Who were born not of the will, so here we've got an apposition, born not of the blood, not of blood, or of the will of flesh, or the will of humanity, but of God. Right? We've got God already up here. The Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, and the glory of his Father's Son, only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me and ranks ahead of me because he was before me." From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. See, grace we've got there. The law, we've got this opposition here. The law indeed was given through Moses. And just like in Matthew, where you see an opposition between Jesus as the new Moses, here Jesus Christ is set up in opposition or in an opposite way to Moses. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known. And so that revelation here falls on Jesus' side. This making known falls on the side of the light. So you've got these dual terms, right? Theologically, then you can go through the entire gospel and see how John is playing with dualism, is playing between light and darkness. And here's the thing, it's very clear from this preface here, from this introduction to John's gospel, that the light overcomes the darkness, right? The light shines in the darkness does not overcome it. But indeed, the light overcomes the darkness. It's the light that comes out ahead in the end, and that is part of what John is trying to do theologically, trying to show the difference. There's also a difference between people. We have the children of God and the people of Israel. Now that's a real problem in John, because he talks about the Jews in very negative ways. And I think we need to be very careful not to take on his understanding of these relationships, right? Judaism is a major world religion today. And I think we don't have to take on John's understanding of Judaism. Later on, he blames the Jews even for the crucifixion. He blames the Jews for many different things throughout the narrative. In the John 9 story that you are going to look at later, he talks about the Jews being the ones who throw the parents of the blind man out of the synagogue, or threaten to anyway, and that's why they're so scared. There's a real sort of negativity around that group, and I think it's probably part of John's community that he's talking about, where there's probably a context of conflict between the Jews and the early group that is diverging from it, the early Christian church. So you saw the dualities, the dual terms, and the opposites. When we think about dualisms, we can think about three different kinds of dualisms. And what's really cool about John is, since we found the literature in Qumran of the Dead Sea Scrolls and of the Essene community that was formed around a righteous teacher, we do see that there were other Jewish groups that had very dualistic way of thinking about the world. One of the prime dualisms that we find in the prologue to John is the one between light and darkness, God and the world. There's really a major sort of cosmic dualism, right? There's these two competing forces in the cosmos that, now it's true that they're not equal, right? For John's community, the community that is the children of God, they are the ones who are the victors, right? So the light has overcome the darkness. That's clear. That's the gospel message for John. So I don't want you to hear that the dualism is sort of an even dualism. This is not Star Wars, where you've got the light and the darkness, the good and the evil fighting, the good force and the bad force, or whatever, and they keep fighting back and forth. I mean, if they weren't even in the Star, of course, we want the good to win, right? Luke Skywalker has to overcome his father, right? But in the Star Wars story, the light and darkness are competing, and they're very much even. In John's story, they're still competing, but it's true that through the cross, through the resurrection, the light has overcome the darkness. And in fact, that's how John understands his theology. It's Christ coming into the world who was opposed to him, who then brings the community out of the world, right? And so they are probably brought away from the rest of the world that is antagonistic to it, and they're saved from this world, right? So the light comes down into the world and gathers a community and pulls them out, and we sort of still living in the world, but the light is beginning to overcome the world. Now, in John and also in Qumran, we have other kinds of dualisms. There's not these two forces in the world. There is two forces, but there's also two kinds of people, right? We saw that in John, the children of God and those who reject Christ. And so you've got these dualisms. Unfortunately, a lot of Christianity has taken on some of this dualism. Now, I think probably for John's community in the time in which was written, where you had two competing communities who are trying to compete for believers and trying to maybe even in antagonism to them, this was probably not, this was a healthy competition perhaps, right? But when we look at Judaism now from a Christian perspective, or even Islam, we have to see that these are folks who are trying to believe in one way or another in the God, right? Judaism proclaims the God that Christianity or Christianity claims the Abrahamic God, and so does Islam, right? And so this ethical dualism, right, of saying, oh, we believers are right and all the others are wrong, I would hope that we could get past that. Now, I know it's part of the theology here of John's Gospel and probably the theology of the church. And at some point, even if you do believe that only your group is the one that's going to receive salvation, that doesn't give you the opportunity or the right to be able to attack others, right? We as Christians, we as people of the Jewish Bible, believe that everyone is made in the image of God. Every creature, every human being is made in the image of God. And so we cannot take the life or go get violent against another, even if we think that their faith community might be wrong about certain precepts that we might hold. But the ethical dualism is very pronounced here in John, more so than in the other Gospels. I don't see it in the Synoptics. I don't see it as much in Paul. Some, but maybe not as much, right? But this sort of division between two forces, it's really, kind of disturbing to find this in the Gospel. And as a critical scholar of religion, I'm a minister, I preach the gospel, but as a critical scholar of religion, this is where one of those points where I'm thankful that I can step back from the text and say, well, I'm not sure that what John was writing for his community necessarily has to be what I believe. I know it's scripture, and I think it's important, and I do believe that Christ is my salvation. But that doesn't mean I have to edge out others and push them away and say, well, they're not believers, so they're not going to heaven. And then that next step, which is the most frightening step of, well, let's just dehumanize them, right? Or they're our enemies. They're the ones they're Christ killers, which became a mantra in the medieval period and beyond, right? Leading to such horrible things as the Holocaust and World War II. When we begin to break up classes of humanities into ethical dualistic groups, good and bad, it gives you a lot of leeway to enact violence against the bad. I wish that we could maybe think a little bit more about other ways of thinking of the world. Now, John doesn't have this, but some writings do, and that is psychological dualism. In the Essene writings, the souls are controlled. There's two pieces of the soul, right? There's a good and the bad, right? So it gets down into the individual as well. Now, John, he doesn't do this. But psychological dualism might be where a lot of us live, right? It's hard for me to call someone bad if I am not entirely good, right? And there are two forces striving within my soul. Paul engages in psychological dualism. He talks about, I know I should be doing this certain thing, but I can't. I'm struggling to do it. And whenever I do it, it's harder for me to do it. And if it weren't for Christ, I wouldn't be able to do it. And I do the bad that I know that I'm not supposed to do, but I don't do the good that I know I can. Now, we all struggle with this. Me, one of my struggles, y'all can't see from here down, but I'm a fairly heavy man, trying to exercise, trying to be good. Sometimes I feel like I've got two little angels. Let's see if I can get them both in the camera. Two little angels sitting on my shoulders. One angel says, I'm driving down the road and I drive by a Dairy Queen, and one angel says, ooh, you want a Dairy Queen, you want the DQ, go get the Blizzard, it's hot outside, you worked hard, you made a really good video. And the other side says, no, you're trying to lose weight, it's not healthy, it's not good for you, you want to be good, remain control, your doctor will be upset, your wife, she needs a healthy Douglas, no, you need to go after it, you need that Blizzard, right? You've got these two, y'all, okay, you're laughing, but you've got these two forces, right, struggling within the soul, right, tearing, pulling us one way or another. I think a lot of us probably live in that tension. Even those of us who are redeemed still probably live in that tension. It's hard for me to call someone entirely bad if I know myself that even in my temptations, I have a tendency to do the bad as well as the good. All of us do. And sometimes I think the ethical dualism is meant to hide up the psychological, right? Sometimes I think it's easy to call someone bad if you're struggling so hard to ignore what it is that in you is truly dark. And so you claim to be the white knight when you've got something going on that you're ignoring and not working through. Right? It's probably getting a little deeper than we wanted to get. But notice that throughout, in the text that you're going to read, as you read through the narrative, John is playing with these two forces, right? Makes the story very compelling. Makes it very interesting. Okay, I'm going to pause here with this lecture, and then y'all can view it, and if you've gotten to here, you've already viewed it, and then continue with the second lecture. Thank you.